All right, so this is episode 2 of season 2, and this is New Histories. Uh, so just to inform everybody about what's going on with yield, and so we're trying to do some like transitioning. We've just gotten this large space in the old museum that we're running. We have a new museum now on campus at the University of Notre Dame, and we're trying to create like a photography center. So we're trying to redirect yield to some degree into supporting that as well. So that's kind of just some info if people see things changing on yield or being updated. But we're here with Gregory Eddi Jones. He's going to introduce Alexey. So let me get a little background on Gregory. So Gregory is a post-photographic artist and writer exploring the intersections of photography and new technology. From 2012 to 2020, Jones was editor of In the In-Between, an independent online journal that examined photographic practices rooted in technological exploration. He has since worked as chief writer and editor for several art and photography organizations in the NFT space, including Fellowship, Photoverso, Bato, and Sculda AI. Jones has contributed numerous essays and interviews to publications that include Foam, After Image, Paper Journal, Lens Culture, and Unseen Magazine, among others. As an artist, his most recent body of work, 4923, combined AI-generated images with scans of vintage photography magazine pages to form a conceptual bridge between the past and future of the medium's technical evolution. And Gregory, if you want to add anything to that would be great. And then just jump into with what Alexey's going to present.
Yeah, I think that's plenty for now. Thank you, Mike. And welcome everybody, and welcome Alexey. So super thrilled to have you. So as Mike mentioned, this is our second episode of the second season of New Histories. This is a monthly conversation series where we speak with artists and writers and curators who are exploring the new technological frontiers of photography as a medium. And I'm super thrilled to welcome Alexey for the chat this month. Alexey Yurenev is a photographer and visual researcher interested in how technology shapes the production of knowledge and collective memory. Yurenev's documentary projects have been published in the New York Times, National Geographic, Topic, and Literary Hub. His work has been acknowledged by organizations such as Photographer of the Year International and Silurian Society of New York, and nominated for an EMMY and Shorty awards. In 2020, Yurenev co-founded a platform dedicated to innovative visual strategies called photodemic.org, and became a faculty member at the International Center of Photography in New York. Yurenev holds an MA in Photography and Society from the Royal Academy of Art, The Hague, and is currently based between New York and Amsterdam. Welcome, Alexey. You have the stage. We're all yours.
Thanks, Gregory, and thanks, Mike. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to talk about my work, and it's actually a really special time because the project I'm about to present is about my grandfather who would have turned 100 years old this month. But I'm just gonna go ahead and share the screen and jump into it just a second. So as Greg introduced me, I'm a photographer and a visual researcher, and for me, this work that I'm going to present today has started 5 years ago, specifically when I was in the middle of my documentary photography practice and working in assignments as a photojournalist, where I was in Moscow working on my projects, and I attended a talk by Fred Richin, who was visiting with his lecture series talking about the future of photography. And for me, that lecture kind of became like a clear point of demarcation of where am I heading with my practice. And specifically, there was one example that Fred showed, which was this project developed by an engineer from Uber, Philip Wang. It was called This Person Doesn't Exist. And for those that are not familiar, the project is a is a generative AI project where Philip Wang was using GANs, generative adversarial neural networks, which I'll get into shortly. And it's a website where with each refresh of a browser, you're confronted with an image of a person that doesn't exist, with a really striking photorealistic quality. So for me, looking at these images, I kind of, I raised two questions. First question is, if we have this technology that is capable of synthesizing images that one can hardly recognize as photography or not. And the second question is like, now that we have this technology at hand, which is commonly used for deep fakes, can I, as a practitioner, use it for something in my practice that is something more meaningful and to kind of turn it against itself? So I began thinking about what can I speculate on? What does not exist in my life? What do I want to know that now I have this tool that is capable of bringing me to a place that doesn't exist? If photojournalism is modeled to bring the viewers to events and places that they would not go to, the AI's promise here is to bring us to these events and places that never existed but could have. So I grew up in Moscow. I was born and raised in Moscow, and I was born 41 years after World War II has ended. But for me, it felt like it ended about 2 weeks before, because I was constantly surrounded by the rhetoric of World War II. My grandfather fought in the war. He fought until he made it to Berlin. He was wounded, lost his brother in action, took part in really big battles, and also was part of Auschwitz liberation. But at home, he categorically refused to talk about his experience at war. And when asked, he would either cry or make jokes. And every year we would go to these newly built memorials on Victory Day, where he would look on all these plaques with names for the name of his brother that was missing in action. And, looking line by line, name by name for the letter L for Lipkin, and never finding his brother's name to no avail, and just sighing, like leaving these memorials. And, and before he died in 2009, he used to tell me, as his only grandson, I'm in charge of carrying his medals and his memories. So when he died, I received his medals, but I did not receive his memories. So, as I said, the war is a religion in Russia. The surrounding rhetoric is omnipresent with his films, photographs, monuments, parades, carnations. It's in a way, it over-informs you, but so I felt like I knew everything about the war, but I knew nothing about it, nothing about the personal experience of my grandfather. And also in Russia, they say that true heroes keep their silence, and the ones that sow the trenches, and the ones that talk are embellishers and confabulators. So this kind of culture of silence was kind of provided the singular narrative of World War II, which for me, looking at those photographs again, is like I felt like I knew everything, but I knew nothing. It's like, what is the personal experience of my grandfather? So I began my search for answers about his memory that doesn't exist in family archives, which consists of, they're really modest. It's a couple dozen photographs that look like the ones on the screen. So looking at these photographs in search of his original experience, it's as if his experience happened in a photography studio in a flash in charge of a magnesium smoke, and the real experience it was obscured in the shadow of the light that hit his face in the studio. And looking for details in the correspondences between my grandparents, these beautiful love letters that he wrote to my grandmother Faina, where he barely talks about his experience at war, but in the middle of the passages of declaring his love to her, he always would put in a paragraph where he talks about how much joy he gets from walking around the ruins of what used to be German cities. And looking at reading these letters, these passages are recurring, but then I've noticed that on the back of these envelopes, there was a stamp, and the stamp read that it was verified by the military censorship, which was, one of the theories is that he was writing those passages. Yes, he did feel those sentiments, but he had to write them in because he was a translator. And these were just reassurance of his patriotism to the third party reading these letters. So the authenticity of his experience was also questionable based on the correspondences. And then looking at the state archives, like this image by Evgeny Haldey, the raising of the flag on the roof of Reichstag. So this image is a reenactment. Haldey was a week late to the actual raising of the first banner on Reichstag, but the image had to be made. He couldn't find a banner, so they sewn a flag from red tablecloths that they found inside the agency of TASS. The watch on the man's hand in the bottom right corner was retouched because it was assumed to be looted, because he also had a watch in the left hand. And also smoke was added for dramatization. So for me, I was tasking, this is why I kind of leaned into working with AI, to depart from photographic representation of World War II that I was surrounded by, to get beyond the iconicity and glory in the medial layer of a photographic layer, to get to some kind of subliminal knowledge that I was not able to get through traditional means of research. So I started looking at the same technology that Philip Wang used, GANs. So GANs stand for Generative Adversarial Neural Networks. This is 5 years ago, and in the AI time, this is Paleolithic. Right now, this is not a text-to-image like prompting algorithm. This is something else. What's interesting about this generative system is that it originates from World War II, specifically from Norbert Wiener's research and feedback systems for radar and surface-to-air detection, used to program surface-to-air systems against V2 rockets and enemy aircraft. So the way it works, there are two neural networks. There is a critic and a forger. Both study a large set of images. My set was quite modest. It was 35,000 images I sourced on a public domain archive of World War II. And so the forger and the critic study this data set, then the forger creates an image, and until the critic is fooled, the image doesn't get produced. And with more of these cycles of learning, the more realistic the image becomes. And again, for me, in the manual for this system, and this is also COVID, so I had a lot of free time and I had to learn Python, and it was like using Google Colab and TensorFlow and all these tools, it was required additional learning. It wasn't just like an interface you can just plug and play. And the way you're supposed to use the system is when the image deviates from something that resembles the original set, and such as photography, you're supposed to correct the vector. But for me, I was more interested in the expression of the machine, because we already have photography. I wanted to find a different kind of image, as I said, devoid of this glory and iconicity that is found in archives. So after weeks and weeks of learning and trying and going through all kinds of errors and problems in the computer, I arrived at this result. It's quite uneventful, but I also found it symbolic because it represented how much I knew about my grandfather's experience before I started working on this project. Some weeks later, I started getting results like this. I mean, I started questioning, looking at these images, is this what the war looks like? Maybe I'm biased because, they call this process of machine learning unsupervised, but in fact, it's quite supervised because I had to crop and classify, optimize all these images for my machine to learn. And of course, I've learned this process more collaborative than user machine, because I felt that I'm studying the same data set just like the machine is. So when I'm looking at the results, I still see the war in resemblance to the original archive. I see battles, I see smoke, I see concentration camps, I see all the content that that the algorithm digested along with me. And to verify my own subjectivity of perception, I decided to create another feedback system by using Google's API called Cloud Vision, which is a API that's responsible for classification of images online, what comes up on Google search, on Google image search. So when I load these images, and we can all arguably agree that they're abstractions, they're not photographs, they're blurs, they're Rorschachs of war, rather than a realistic representation of your quotation of the visible, whatever you want to call it. And Google, the API, with 85% confidence, sees the same content that I'm seeing in these images, which is military uniform, military person, military vehicle, history, squad, military, etc. And also with a certain degree of confidence since photography. You can see other results here as well. Uniform, military organization, visual arts, portrait photography. The photography keeps coming up, but this is not photography. This is synthetic imagery. I also refined another data set, which was made just of portraits of soldiers, similar to the ones that I had in my personal family archive, soldiers posing in the field or in studio. And what the machine spewed out was from healthy looking soldiers full of glory and iconicity, it turned them into monsters, disfigured faces. So here, I think that this is the point where the machine, the technological discourse debunks the artificial intelligence as intelligent. But I think here the knowledge is not just statistical, it's psychological. It shows the true face of war, which is grotesque. Sometime in the process, I was working together with a Dutch book designer, Toon van der Heijden, and he was looking at my images and he called out this particular image on the left, that it carries a striking resemblance to one of the images found in an anti-war manifesto from World War I called War Against War by Ernst Friedrich. Ernst Friedrich was a narco-pacifist who wrote this manifesto in 1924, also 100 years ago. And he collected all the evidence of horror and atrocity of World War I, just dead soldiers, disfigured faces, burned down cities. And he pledged in 4 languages, in English, German, Dutch, and French, to, by displaying this photographic evidence, being the only type of evidence, as he argued, that to stop all future wars. What I did is one of the visual outcomes of my project is actually juxtaposing my GAN-produced images, which are trained on World War II, which happened by some coincidence. All of them have a doppelganger inside the book. So together, they created dialectic of seeing through technologies separated by 100 years apart. One of them, as Friedrich argues, is the only form of credible witnessing, only form of war evidence that results from credible witnessing. And I propose that just generative images of my creation and together with GAN are also a form of war evidence that doesn't result from credible witnessing. So GANs, as I mentioned before, are really data hungry. For them to perform better, you need a lot of information. So I was able to get access to, through search in archives, I was able to find Russian Ministry of Defense archives where by typing my grandfather's name, all of a sudden, from knowing nothing, I knew I was submerged by this deluge of data that was just indecipherable. I knew there was this picture I've never seen before, his war routes, maps, all the battles he was in, scans of war logs and divisions he was fighting in. And at that point, what do you do with all this information? It was completely indecipherable, but also in a way, what I have produced with AI already resulted in this tacit knowledge I was seeking. But looking at this archive, I immediately thought of Naum, my grandfather's brother, that my family at that point was looking for 79 years and never was able to find him. So I typed up his name and his name came up right away. And there was a dot on the map where he was killed. And there was a document describing the day he was killed, where he was fighting for a strategic section of a railroad into Stalingrad and sustaining a heavy fire from artillery, ground, and air. He was killed in action, and his burial site was marked on a map, which I was able to look through Google search, Street View, and found out it was not developed. So I set to travel there as soon as the travel restrictions were released after COVID. And using World War II maps that I found in the archive and satellite imagery, I created a perimeter of 3 kilometers of the approximate site of death and burial. And for this work, I decided to use an 8x10 camera, traditional apparatus, but I also wanted to see the technological capacity of photography and what kind of knowledge can be produced by using these tools that are capable of peeling layers of reality to get to some other types of knowledge. So I used orthographic film, which is commonly used for darkroom manipulations and internegatives and copies of documents. And this film in particular is blind to what human eye sees as red. So it was this gesture to peel away layers of visible spectrum to get to that point in history where I was standing, spatially accurate, but temporally dislocated by 8 decades. And, you know, Naum's presence in my life was defined by his absence. You know, he was just, every time his name was brought up, it was just, where is Naum? He's missing. So everywhere I would look, it was basically, I was in the middle of the winter in the Russian prairies outside of Volgograd, which is formerly Stalingrad. I was basically photographing white snow and horizon lines. So here the technology was able to produce the image of the void that represented Naum in my family's life. And going back to AI generated image, if we are looking at 35,000 perspectives, 35,000 images that are resulting in a new image like this one, and you know, and each image that is in the data set, we all know that has 4 authors of meaning. It's photographer, camera, subject, and audience, and then you add time to that as a dimension. So if this is 35,000 perspectives compressed into one, then these images are 2 million perspectives of dead soldiers that fell in the Battle of Stalingrad and are lying in this field. And on the left, it's also my collaboration with the Russian snow that got inside my dark slide of a 8x10 camera. Before leaving, I went to the Monument of Motherland Coals, which is in Volgograd, commemorating all the battle and the soldiers that fell in the field. And I witnessed this regiment of soldiers go into the monument to take oath to join the Russian army. And 2 weeks later, Russia unfolded its full-scale invasion on Ukraine. And at this point, it felt like I created a war machine that began to dream of itself. There's still many questions I had about my grandfather's time in the war, and specifically about this Medal of Glory and 3rd class, which is given out for an act of valor or an act of heroism. We really had to do something heroic to get this kind of to be decorated with this medal. So with additional search in the archives, I was able to find this document, which became a kind of a map of sorts, most informing document in the collection that stated his act of valor on this page, where on July 17th, 1944, my grandfather was 20 years old, and it was during the counteroffensive in Western Ukraine. He forded a river, killed a sniper, a machine gunner, took an anti-tank 6-person unit captive, and killed 2 more that resisted. And that let the Soviet army advance and expel the enemy outside the borders of the Soviet Union. So I used found another map. I traveled there and looked at the place where I'm standing in the correct place, but in the wrong time. But even now, this is already during the full-scale invasion, but I'm in the Western Ukraine, and the memory, which is, you know, memory of that period that I'm trying to work with, is now representing the invader. So all the monuments are being defaced, and inside these defaced monuments, I find resemblance to my AI images. These defaced monuments is also a form of, can be read as a form of a glitch where the medial layer is being removed and something that is beyond it is being visible. Looking back at the family archives, I found out that on the same day when my grandfather is killing Nazis in Western Ukraine and getting decorated with the medal, my grandmother is getting photographed with her girlfriends in a dormitory. And since my grandfather this photograph with a poem that she wrote on the back, which read, in this poetic way that the youth is being stolen from them because of the war, and it will never come back. So at this time already, the technology has significantly progressed, and we have engines such as Stable Diffusion and these prompt-based generative AI systems. So I fine-tuned a model using the war machine images that I've created with the GAN that I showed in the beginning of the presentation, photographs of my grandfather, and also photographs from the field that I've made in Ukraine at the site where the event happened. And together I created, and I used the poem that my grandmother wrote as the text in this graphic novel. And the prompts were made from the description of the act of valor found in the documents. So in this way, creating a graphic novel that's connecting the two histories together. And to generate proximity to his experience, I mean, that's basically a byline of this whole project. Last fall, I was working in Ukraine again, and I was able to photograph a surgery of a Ukrainian soldier that had his jaw blown off by a mine. And it was a 15-hour-long surgery where they took a fibula of his leg and rebuilt the jaw from that. And I was using a digital camera, and I wanted to see, again, like it's not just AI, it's not just archives, it's just how can we use these different methods and these different technologies to produce tacit knowledge. So I decided to create a way of working with a digital camera by using a bulb function, taking long exposures. And in these long exposures, I would measure my ability to look at the surgery. So the longer I could look, the longer the exposure would be, and therefore the more abstract images would be produced, and the more disturbing the sight was, the shorter the shutter speed would be, and the more realistic the images would become. And then I discovered that in Brighton Beach, New York, it's a Russian-speaking community in Brooklyn, and where I was working in the past as doing documentary projects. There is a community of World War II veterans that once was 3,000 strong, but as of today, I think there's about 60 people are still living, and 19 of them are turning 100 years or more. And when communicative memory goes extinct, the living memory goes extinct, it's the provenance over this memory moves on to mnemonic institutions such as archives, museums, and governments, and then it gets manipulated in ways like we see today, where the image of these people and memory of my grandfather is being used to justify the invasion of Ukraine. So for me, it was important to collect these oral histories, and also as they're disappearing, and also to be in proximity of somebody who may have brushed shoulders with my grandfather or shared a joke. And I collected these interviews, and also in an attempt to kind of preserve them for future generations. And I'll show you a little clip.
Да, чтобы никогда больше не было войн никаких.
Что такое история человечества?
История войн.
Это история войн. За все время наблюдения есть. Это говорят, я не знаю, что-то, год или два, что не было войн. А то все время войны. Вот за нашу короткую жизнь сколько войн было. сопровождался тоже со стороны немцев минометный разрыв, и меня ранило. Я был весь в крови. И ноги, и руки, и буквально все. У меня была полевая сумка. И этот блокнот тоже лежал там. И самый этот крупный осколок попал именно в эту сумку. И он немного задержал, а то было бы еще хуже.
Я листаю, смотрю, офицерский вальс, который сейчас называется случайный вальс. Боречка, вы помните слова? Ночь коротка, спят облака, и лежит у меня на ладони незнакомая ваша рука.
Я люблю это.
После тревог спит городок, танцевать я совсем разучился, и прошу из меня извинить. Утро зовет снова в поход, танцевать я совсем разучился, и прошу вас меня извинить. Хоть я с вами совсем не знаком, и далеко отсюда мой дом, я как будто бы снова возле дома родного. В этом зале пустом мы танцуем вдвоем, так скажите хоть слово, сам не знаю о чем. Нет, все.
Не хочу я больше, не могу.
Там витамины, сейчас восстановишься. Тебе говорить еще сколько? Давай, не сопротивляйся.
You know, remembering is a reconstruction of a fragmented past and the projected future that's brought into the present. So I found there's one more thing I could do is what I decided could not leave these veterans without showing them and telling them about artificial intelligence, and that there is a technology there today that is capable of generating new images. And by no means I wanted to deceive them, so I explained them that these are not photographs. These are synthetic images. They're simulacrum of something else, you know. And they listened to me with a big interest, and I was showing them, and I was like, do you see something, like also using this kind of a feedback method as I was using with the Google Cloud API and Cloud Vision API, and even this whole critic forger dialectic. And they were looking at these images, and you know, they were seeing, just like me, just like the Cloud Vision, they were seeing events that they resembled war. They saw tanks, they saw concentration camps, they saw smoke, they saw explosions, they saw artillery. And some of them would look at them and say that this is nonsense, and they were not wrong. And you know, in this journey I embarked on, I traveled through these, you know, histories and spaces and time, and to kind of arrive at this multivocal and multimodal methodology for historical investigation, where in search of this solid floor of memory, you know, to stand on, to realize that the floor is in fact a liquid, and we just need to learn how to swim in order not to drown.
That was incredible. Thank you so much, Alexey, for that. Wow, what a journey all of this work represents. I was just really touched at the idea of how such a simple desire to understand more about your grandfather's life could lead you on such an odyssey that spans all these new technologies and photographic forms, and exploring community and geography and so much more. Is this line of work still ongoing, or has it been completed?
With me, it's really hard to the completed part, you know.
I could understand.
It's like one of those projects. I mean, it's somebody who was talking to someone, is like, well, listen, this is like Walter Benjamin's arches, like you will die before you finish them. And it's been it's like one of those projects where you open a door and there's like 10 more, and and then you open another one, and then some of them you open and then you close it and keep going. But yeah, there's still parts in process. I still continue working on it in different capacities. I mean, right now I'm just working on the installation part, and then there's a couple chapters in the works, and then the book, and so it's definitely, I'm in a slower pace of production of it, like trying to wrap certain chapters up into their individual components and visual outcomes. But yes, to answer your question shorter, it's still ongoing.
I have a little list of questions here, but Mike, did you have anything that you wanted to jump in on?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting how you, like Gregory said, it's this kind of biography, and then you've somehow kind of injected the AI component, like your own kind of technological understanding of the photographic medium and things like that. So I think it's just, like you mentioned the poem, but I think the whole process just seems very poetic in the way things kind of move in and out, and the different kind of representational imagery and the AI generated imagery and the abstraction. The things that I can't comprehend is how, and I didn't really understand it until you mentioned that the people you had interviewed at the end could recognize tanks and that these were images of war. And I couldn't understand how Google, just by seeing these images, these abstracted images, could pull that out. But if they could pull that out, I mean, it makes sense that Google could. It's just that my inexperience with war doesn't allow me to see those things. But Google, with this massive database, is able to, and the people that were involved in it are able to. So I don't know if you want to go into that a little more, but I just thought that was really interesting.
No, absolutely. No, and I actually, this is the part I can continue working on. I actually went back because this part was shot a year ago with the veterans, and I keep going back because I know they are, now there's 4 people I interviewed are passed away, and it's a really strong community. And it's also the idea of memorialization of that. There's a woman that takes care of them. She's in one of the photographs. She's like the self-appointed guardian of memory, and how important that memory is to pass down, and especially, extracted from the original context of, let's say, like, the post-Soviet context, being in America, where people don't even know what May 9th means, right? And for them to see this technology, and also to see what happens to their memory in their time, even how it's being used now to justify the invasion per se, and to engage them with this generative technology. I think it's kind of fascinating. Also, if you think about them, they're like the true people of 20th century. I mean, they grew up with horses, and they saw from telephone to internet to AI in their lifetime, so absolutely they are the ones that, to do this recognition test, this Turing test of recognition. And yeah, I don't know, I kind of meandered away, but I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I thought that was really a good explanation. It fascinates me that people really don't understand how new technology is. I mean, even the television has only been around since the 50s. So it's incomprehensible that someone has lived through. You think this technology has been around much longer than it has, but the idea that there have been people that have lived through the beginnings of it until now is amazing. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find it interesting how, like, I mean, when a lot of these prompt-based AI systems started to become available for public use, I feel like I saw a lot of artists just kind of default to using the tools to explore, like, kind of like speculative past or speculative future, like a lot of sci-fi images, or a lot of, like, the Abraham Lincoln images with just like historical satire. I've seen a lot, and it's really interesting, just the idea of how there's kind of like kind of a real world application that you're exploring, or like a connection to the past that feels actually tangible and personal.
Mm-hmm.
And I always find it interesting, like, when like really like cutting edge tools are used in such personal ways. I mean, the technology of the algorithms are, like, by themselves, they're very cold, things, right? And I think that the way that you've been exploring them adds such warmth to it. It's not a super complicated comment, but I felt one that needed to be made.
Thank you. I mean, it is a compliment, but you know, and for me, it's like also, I mean, it began in this, you know, there's always about this channeling through this personal narrative, you know, and trying to, you know, kind of, as I said, generate proximity to my grandfather's time in this unimaginable experience, and also to fill these voids, right? And through that, like looking at the technology's capacities and limitations to disrupt a stable historical narrative, you know, and you know, these, as we see, it produces this novel type of fiction, you know, which is, it is destructive, but it's something else, you know. It does create this other type of connection. Is this a new way of communication? And what is, you know, and also ask, you know, questions the way we are, what is photography, what has photography has been, what is the archive, you know, like what are all these, and again, we're looking at this new technology, and it is a new technology, but we're not taking into consideration, you know, all the flaws of the past that are embedded into it, you know, all these, its own social relations of the technology itself, you know. So but they all have, I think all technology has a capacity of creating this warmth and this personal connection. It just depends how you use it. And, you know, I like to say that, I mean, I think it's Le Guin's quote, but, you know, a difference between a weapon and a tool is how you hold it. And I think that's just kind of a motto for my practice in the way I use the technology.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a broader sense, I mean, there's so many discussions now that are just trying to unpack all of what AI means to the future of photography, right? And how quickly these tools are growing in sophistication, how much easier they are to use than they were even just 6 months ago. You know, the growth in development is exponential, and you know, you can already see a lot of traditional use cases for the camera being replaced by these tools, and it begs kind of a natural question of where does that leave photography for the future? What is the essential role of the camera that no other tool can fulfill? And it, you know, alongside that, you know, the archive of war images that you would use to train your model, you know, that whole area is incredibly fascinating to me, to think that, you know, virtually any photograph or image that has been digitized up to this point can now be seen as having been made in service to machine learning, and in service to these mechanisms where the production of images is essentially automated, right? And that follows in this legacy of the history of photography's technological development, where year by year, you know, it's a consistent drive to make images easier to make, faster to make, cheaper to make. And so in that sense, AI feels like this logical kind of next step in that lineage. I don't know if I have any particular question in that, but just a whole bunch of thoughts that I had to get out.
No, I can kind of elaborate on that, actually. I mean, for me, it's also this working with AI made me rethink my photographic practice. I mean, as you see in certain examples, like the surgery images, et cetera, like, and even in the field work that I'm doing, of like how I approach it, because I think that now, you know, just as you said, it's, you know, photographic practice has become a form of data collection and for the potential future machine learning. And what does it even mean? I mean, I think that, and also the new systems that are being developed, they're less and less so they have flaws or any kind of portals into machine intelligence. Like, you know, the GANs had they're glitchy, you know, and the earlier DALIs and whatever, the engines would give you errors of sorts that I think that these errors are portals into the machine intelligence and into another language. It's kind of sad to see that it's just trying to replicate existing medias, but it's, you know, there's two things on that note is like, McLuhan said that, the content of a new medium is its previous medium until it defines itself. So, the content of photography was painting, the content of theater, cinema was theater, etc. So the content of AI is internet. So it's up to us, the artists, to define what this thing is going to be. And I really hope that we're not going to try just to replicate photography in existing mediums and arrive at something else. And just like, Benjamin said that, photography liberated art from its aura, I believe that generative AI's potential is to emancipate photography of its authority over truth. And that will allow photography to develop into something else, that will explore fiction potentials, will explore story potentials. I forget who said that stories are empathy machines, but there's so much potential. And if we depart from this conversation of true, false, and this other heritage of photography's romance with authenticity and truth, and then we can arrive at something else both beneficial for photography and AI.
I even think the idea that photography could be liberated from, that AI could actually show like this story, like these stories and things like that, and photography can be left to being the authentic. You know what I mean? Like, let's abandon photography as being this authentic representation still, but at least we can move into an area where we're not constantly trying to make, like you said, reproduce that. So we can kind of jettison the idea that we need photography to create these kind of even fictional spaces. We have AI now to do that in these generative places. So I think that's really interesting too. It'll be fascinating to kind of see which direction it goes in. It could go in both or all sorts of different directions, but I also wanted to let the people that are attending, if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and I'll get you on to the presentation so you can ask your question also.
You could also type it into the chat if you're shy, and I can read it for you.
But if we have other questions as we're waiting for people to respond, so I don't know if you want to go back, like maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you got involved in photography or into the visual arts too. Like, how did that start? Like what, because you're talking about your family and your little bit of your family history, like what's your personal history with photography and how you got involved in it?
So I immigrated with my family to New York from Moscow in 2002, and it was kind of disconnected from my community there, and I was just honestly from boredom. I picked up a camera, and it was the darkroom of, like, I think it's kind of a common story. I see a print come up in the developer, and that was kind of a game over. And then I worked, I got a job as a photo assistant. I was working as a photo assistant in New York City, mostly for commercial practitioners and as a lighting technician for a number of years. And then I began my own photographic commercial practice. And then simultaneously, I couldn't return to Russia because of the conscription. And when I was able to return, it was kind of flipped the switch, and I was already kind of longing for a subject with more humility in the work that I was doing. So I began working on documentary projects, working in Russia and Ukraine from 2014 on. And then, progressing into, I did a program at International Center of Photography for documentary practice, and then, continue working on assignment and doing this long form documentary. And for me, was the way my practice was also always growing. It's like it was always kind of, I don't like to stay in the same place for too long. That's why my practice has a really big breadth. And even to this day right now, like I'm splitting my time between this really intense visual research and doing some on the ground, more classical documentary projects where I'm just there, walking around 30 kilometers a day with a analog medium format camera and just seeking what I desire to see. It's just but the one feeds the other and informs the other. So it's important for me to kind of have this breadth of work that I can to sustain what I do.
So we don't have any takers so far with their own questions. Gregory, do you have other questions, or do you want to like start to wrap it up? We're getting close to the end of the hour also.
Yeah, I think we can wrap up pretty soon. I'm trying to read my own handwriting. Sorry. It's not very good. Um, yeah, I'm having
I guess another question I would have is how, like the abstract, like the purely abstract images to me are like you know, like they're the most beautiful, but they're like represent carnage still and all this. The
Yeah.
deformities that happen with the kind of portraiture, you know, obviously kind of like you said, they're kind of monstrous and they show the war in that way. But with the abstraction, like I think they're beautiful, like they're just nice to look at. And I'm a huge, you know, abstract geek, so it's not hard to kind of get me impressed with some abstract imagery. But like how did you, you know, the process of like selecting, like how difficult was that? I mean, were you just overwhelmed with the amount of kind of things that you could choose from, or did you have to really dig in and try to find something that really appealed to you?
You know, I was I do have as a photographer, I usually overproduce, and so here I was. It's quite strange actually. I mean, for somebody who works with AI, I only generated from those abstract images from these two models that I made. I only generated 150 images, and because I already knew that I would, you know, for me to decipher signal from noise, I needed to kind of limit my, you know, productivity here. I also have a different epochs. I have earlier epochs of evolution, which are even less output, probably output of like 25 images. But I kind of knew of this pitfall of like overproduction that kind of needed to slow down. I actually, with the graphic novel, was that much harder because it was like this prompting to get to the things I wanted to prompt. So it was a little bit more editing. But going back to the original, not a question about what you started from, but talking about these abstractions, you know, for me, it's like also what I was looking through. These images remind me more like they're like Gustave Doré's engravings of, you know, of Inferno, or like Goya's depiction of war, which are also, there is something sublime. I mean, if you look at war photography in general, there is something so sublime and beautiful in this horror, you know, that is why, I mean, we're so drawn to see these images of aftermath and destruction. And I think it really kind of picks up on that. And especially the epic nature of it all, you know, like of an explosion, you know, of course, yeah, that's there. But the soldiers, yeah, they're just, it's, if you, the Ernst Friedrich discovery was crazy, you know, that to see, if you get a chance to look at the book, The War Against War, I mean, if you, and again, the War Against War book is World War I, and my images are trained on World War II, but there's no difference. It's like this image that underlies an image, you know, it's this memory concealed, this flash under the skin, you know, that's what it's showing. And it's really, you know, ominous in this way.
Yeah, the portraits that you created were particularly and maybe very fittingly grotesque in a way, you know, how they, you know, like they depict such like broken human forms, and you know, it's such a, I mean, it feels so appropriate to envision soldiers like that who come home, you know, largely with broken bodies.
Or just, or mental health condition, you know, maybe it's the inside, you know what I mean? It's not, it's like, for example, I would
Yeah.
project it onto my own grandfather. Yeah, he's a hero, but what does it mean to be a hero? You know, and it's like, what is that, why he was not talking, you know, like this is the
Yeah.
part. You know,
What does it cost to be one?
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that's what it is with looking at these images. You know, it's because we know that they're not actual depictions. So the idea of thinking of it more as like psychological, I mean, that's an abstraction on its own. And so then when you apply that, that makes them more interesting. So again, you know, I like artwork that can stand on its own, but when I hear an artist kind of explain it even more and like I can get some more depth to it, like I like looking at the images on their own, like at face value, I can look at them and appreciate them. But then when you just add that little bit, that little kind of perspective on it, it just makes them even more kind of interesting, and I can connect with them more because I'm just, you know, at the moment, and I've discussed this on other videos before and in other projects, is that most people, when they look at artwork, they only look at it for like 30 seconds and they don't give themselves time to kind of really delve deeper into the psychological factors or what this abstraction is really, I'm really connecting with in this abstraction. So it's helpful when an artist can say, still continue to be a guide and say, hey, look at this part of it and look, you know, maybe think about it in this way. So I think I appreciate that. And I appreciate these videos that we do, because every video that we've done, it's just made me more invested in the artwork. And and the thing is, it's not because, you know, I need the explanation. Like at face value, all this artwork is really interesting to me. It's just that it just allows for so much more depth. I mean, I can come to a work of art on my own from many different perspectives, but I think it's harder for people to do that because they don't slow down and aren't patient with it. So this idea that, you know, I'm going to spend 30 seconds with a work of art and kind of have this complete understanding of it, that's kind of the society. Like we just, you know, we want instant gratification. So I think it's good that we do these kind of interviews with everyone and kind of get that deeper knowledge. And it's from the artist perspective, and then we can come in and add our own kind of, you know, experience to it as well. So I really appreciate that you've come on and talked more about the projects.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, this is amazing. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for sharing just super fascinating work. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you're working on next. So let's please stay in touch.
I'll keep you posted.
Cool.